And at Wilson Learning, our approach to change is really driven and centered around what we call the change cycle model. The change cycle model is really the core model that Wilson Learning uses to help individuals, leaders, and teams and businesses contextualize what happens during times of change or challenge or turbulence in their business environments. There's three major components to this model and how it helps individuals and groups understand change and the impact of change. This is often experienced as what we call the trigger of change. But what is implicit in this whole process is the understanding that very rarely is change all at once, the way it's described to us by our people. Often that trigger is simply the natural culmination of a gradual accretion of different things that start to contribute to the discomfort that people start to feel when circumstances that they're used to, that they're comfortable operating in, start to change and alter over a period of time. Be that as it may, the experience of that change is usually as a trigger event. Someone says something, the organization announces something, someone's team is changed, some reorganization happens in the business environment. People are moved, sometimes geographically, sometimes from team to team. And in all of these situations, it's that trigger event that makes the person feel like they've been knocked off that plateau of stability and into that huge cloud of uncertainty that we experience as the in-between times. Individuals and teams start to use their energy in inefficient, ineffective ways rather than trying to put as much of it as possible into trying and making that change work the way the organization needs them to. Our ability to take stock of the situation with some level of objectivity really goes back to one of my favorite quotations from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space." And our ability to use that space to really start to ask ourselves what we're saying to ourselves, why we're saying that to ourselves, and whether this is really true, starts to dictate how we feel about the situation, how we act in that situation, and ultimately what we do to move out of that situation in a certain manner. So that process is what we call self-talk. Taking control of that internal conversation or your self-talk is what helps people understand that your perception of the events happening around you often contribute greatly to your experience of those events as either negative or positive. When it comes to the third and final phase of this model, which is now the way forward or moving forward. And here's where, when I've taken control of my self-talk, I've now given myself the opportunity to make a conscious choice about the story that I want to tell myself, the people around me, and the world at large about the change and how we're dealing with it. When I've taken responsibility for how I feel and what I want to be doing moving forward so that I can look at this change and make it work more positively for me, now that gives me more control and more of an option as to the story and the actions that I want to be telling and showing people around me during these times of change. And this is where we talk about the choice that we face to tell one of three stories. Typically, individuals start to tell one of two different stories if they have not taken charge of their self-talk. And these are what we call the stories of survival and the story of transition. The story of survival is a story where you relinquish control and you simply see yourself as a victim of the circumstances. The story of transition isn't quite the same. It's similar, but it has a few differences. And the big characterizing feature of the story of transition that some people tell is cynicism. We're changing again. We're restructuring again. We're shuffling again. We're coming up with a new strategy one more time. Yep, one more change, just like 15 other changes that have happened in the last 5 years. The problem with the story of transition is, while people may think they're just keeping on like good soldiers, that feeling of cynicism starts to infuse every action and every conversation that people start to have, and it doesn't really give the change the momentum and the commitment that it needs to work the way the business needs it to. And this is where the ability of people to choose what we call story 3, the story of potentiality. That's where you want people to be operating from. When individuals and teams and organizations all start telling this story of potentiality, story 3, that's when businesses are able to harness resilience and the ability to get their people to drive change and make it work the way the business needs it. And that, in essence, is what the change cycle model explains for us.